I'm fortunate to have two parents still alive. They're 89 and they're poster children for aging in their very different ways. My father is a kamikaze resistant chap who gets very surprised when he falls off a ladder and says it never moved before. My mother is pulling away and not using her muscles because she's afraid that something bad will happen. So I'm studying them. I actually told my father I was doing a talk on aging. He said, I don't think I'll bother. So I've recently become really interested in, and some people may know about this more than I do, the Japanese art of Kintsugi. That may be familiar to you. It's an art that developed out of the ancient tea culture. And the story goes that a tea master was preparing tea for the warlord. And the young servant boy broke the valuable bowl onto the floor, and it instantly broke into 5 pieces. And the warlord raised a hand to punish the boy. But instead, the tea master swiftly intervened, sang a poem, took responsibility for the young servant boy, atoning for what he'd done. He then took the 5 pieces and, using the urushi gold lacquer technique, reconstructed the bowl. Kin means gold and suji means reconnect. I actually broke this and reconnected it in a workshop. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. As a 63-year-old psychotherapist, Kintsugi, I believe, helps me reflect on some challenges in aging, both personally and in my 30 years practice with clients. It was Dr. Seuss who said, "How did it get late so soon?" And it strikes me when I work with clients who are approaching the latter years of their lives, that ending evokes a whole range of responses that come to light as a response to the finality of the end. And sometimes what comes to light can feel new. And I've also observed that these patterns or emotions may already be known, but they've got increased intensity and come to like a crescendo, so that facing things has a now or never quality. I learned about this at the cold face, as it were, when I had to move, chose to move with my husband from London to Oxfordshire, and was needing to impose an ending date on my clients many months in advance. And that was because of the relocation. It was someone who said our unconscious doesn't have a sense of time. And I do think it's possible for us to live most of our lives without any sense that we have all the time in the world. And sometimes if we have a sense of time running out, or if the traumas of life's existence change things, that quality of time can get scrambled. And then maybe time can feel more precious. I had a friend who was perfectly healthy, and she said to me, I only recently realized that I was going to die. Because her older husband said to her, you won't feel it yet, but when you reach middle age, you will. And suddenly I got what he meant. So facing a time boundary in therapy or at the time boundary of life itself, can, I believe, bring this sense of urgency. And it can feel as though the camera lens is suddenly shifted. I remember a client once saying, when things change, I get terrified. I hold on to them for dear life. And working with this person felt rather like listening to a frenzied string section of an orchestra coming to a climax. Another person I worked with had such a sense of abandonment that she said she felt it in her bones. And when I removed her secure base with my relocation, she was filled with envy. I hate you for having a good life without me. I do wonder if our relationship with others can sometimes be a painful mirror for what we don't have, or we feel we have a sense of deficit. And maybe that sense of deficit is potentially more painful as we age, because it becomes more underlined and permanent. So although I have 2 stepsons and 4 step-grandchildren, I have not had my own children. And I do sometimes ponder what the experience of my final days will be like without those primary attachments. And occasionally, I've told my sister this, but I'm going to say this, I occasionally have painful indications of lack when my sister's relationship with her children seems to have such depth and significance. And this seems to underline my own lack of a parent-child bond with a biological child of my own. One of the things I've learned powerfully in psychotherapy has been to honor process. And I learned this long ago when in my late 20s, I went through a very painful relationship breakup. I do wonder if as we age, our processing is even more important as experience and unresolved traumas can accumulate, rather like the domino effect. So clients that I've worked with who've reached their 80s maybe have had no space or time in their lives to be reflective or process their feelings. And they appear rather like a bottle of water to be full to the brim and overflowing with unprocessed feelings and accumulated dismays. 1 or 2 older clients were so stuck in survival and fight mode that they were profoundly rejecting of their own vulnerability, rather like my own parents, in fact. They hated their decline, and any possibility for joy seemed as if it was gobbled up by disenchantment or the fear of obsolescence, I think we've spoken about. So that was Sue, wasn't it? This makes me think of the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. Does anybody know that story? By Marjorie Williams. If you don't know it, I recommend it. It's about toys in a boy's nursery. And the Velveteen Rabbit was filled with sawdust that was out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. And he didn't match up to the mechanical toys that boasted and swaggered about. But what changed for him was when he learned about what made him real by another wise toy called Skin Horse. Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long time, really loves you, then you become real. Does it hurt? Asked the Velveteen Rabbit. Sometimes. But when you're real, you don't mind being hurt. It doesn't happen often to people who break easily or who have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you're loose in your joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. When you're real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And this is what is so countercultural about kintsugi. So when the servant boy broke the invaluable piece, he would have felt humiliation, shame, disappointment, and hurt. But it was what came next that mattered. The broken pieces were collected on the floor where they were shattered. They were held in the hand first and contemplated. I love that bit. When I went to the workshop to learn the art of Kintsugi a month ago in London, I was amazed when the workshop leader said, "Those who self-harm cover their arms with long sleeves, but Kintsugi teaches us to wear our failures and vulnerabilities and share them with others. That makes us stronger and more beautiful." I don't know about you, but I love the TV program called The Repair Shop. It's really good for the soul. The art of mending something is both ordinary and extraordinary. And it takes time for something to be recreated and a kind of reverence. When mended, an object can become new and more beautiful than before, like a collage bound together by gold. I heard the phrase, "the world's going to hell in a handcart," a few times recently. I understand why the national and international narrative about fear, war, climate catastrophe, and destruction is so ramped up, and there are existential fears of the end times globally. There's much in the wider world that worries many of us. As we face things that we can do nothing about, we can feel powerless, despondent, and start living our lives with an undercurrent of grumbling worry, fueled by the bombardment of incessant news from our media. I have a theory that negativity and pessimism tends to stick to itself like a Velcro. We may see examples of folk we know who struggle with that. They sometimes say things aren't what they used to be. I had a tricky boss when I was younger. And when I was a bright young thing, I came up with these new ideas. And he always said, "We tried that back in 1982 and it didn't work then." And that kind of comparative nostalgia seems to be sometimes unhelpful and corroding. And of course, in terms of quality of life, material prosperity, advances in healthcare, education and basic needs, reduced child mortality and increased life expectancy, many things are getting better in many parts of the world. Maybe we don't share or hear enough and seek those good things out. We can so easily become negatively biased. So, how can we find ways to counter this slip down the hill into a pit of despair? Maybe the gathering up the pieces in Kintsugi, the contemplation of what is, kindly, reverently, and allowing what feels broken to be pieced together over time is what psychotherapy is. Maybe it's what's living with ourselves compassionately is. When mending a broken pot, we were taught to spread the epoxy, never heard of that, epoxy glue on the broken pieces lavishly, and then we held the pieces together like a child might, very, very, very still, and then we flicked the powdered gold over the cracks with lavish abandon. Such fun. Is one way to counter the age of despondency and despair to use our imaginations liberally, to be re-enchanted by the world. It amazes me that the pot was mended with gold. Gold! Gold is strong, luminous, dense, bright, noble, resists corrosion, is indestructible. To choose something so precious for a broken pot is countercultural. It's also subversive. Such extravagance in creativity, might that convict us of a truth, of the magnificence of every moment? Can we seek out the small miracles and revel in them, burnishing our gold connections, however seemingly insignificant or subtle? What helps us feel the tap on the shoulder to slow down and notice them? I've been involved in a Herculean process and personal struggle in the last few years during the process of writing my book on trauma, then marketing and promoting it, working with folk with trauma, talking about trauma, I have learned how easy it is for me to become personally out of balance. An example would be, we recently heard the good news that the book is to be translated into Spanish for the South American and American audience. What I noticed was that good news felt great for about 5 minutes. Then guess what? It faded. I was like, that's not right. Even though it's been a creative process, it's been easy for me to be caught up rather like a hamster on a wheel with what's next, to get up, to keep up with the demands of emails, podcasts, blogs, YouTube, social media, all of which gobble up my time and my joy and balance, and rather like Gulliver's frog in the water. Yeah, that's very sobering. This activity has stirred up, this book activity has stirred up in me an unconscious need to make a difference, which I've always had, but it's worse now. And I think that's because there's a feeling of time running out at this stage of my life. And it's been a hazard of the process to get caught up with a sense of urgency. And ironically, I'm living out the title of the first chapter of the book, which you won't believe. Trauma takes us over. So I feel so much more grounded and content when I think of the twist on the old adage, don't just do something, stop. When I wait and I ponder, when I find what moves me, what enchants me, when I don't mind being wobbly, seeking out my simple joy, paying attention to process, I become less reactive, I come back to me.